Well, that is Germany debt. It's 78.4% of GDP 2013. That means the debt reflects 78.4% of GDP. There's Norway. Well, that is the debt clock, nationaldebtclock.org. You can see, if you just pick a country, you see their debt. There's the national debt of Belgium. It's 319 billion euros. If you take America as an example, US, it is $17 trillion. 17 trillion. 17 million, okay? Well, that is from the official website of the US government, and it shows you the debt. And very well, as you can see down there, US total debt, this interest paid per citizen, well, it's really detailed. And here's the entire number. It's over 17 trillion US dollars, or 17 million. So that is from the website nationaldebtclock.org, and it's around 17 trillion as well, a little bit higher actually than the official American version. Here it's at 17.653 trillion US national debt, and here it's at 17.662 trillion. Well, these are live computations, okay? They assess this on data that they get, so these are all assessments. Well, that is interesting. People living in poverty, 47 million in the US alone. Without insurance, 47 million. That's incredible. Actual unemployed, 19 million. Official unemployed, 9.6 million. There are over 20 million people in America unemployed. Officially accepted that are less than 3 months old is 9.6 million, but 20 million is the overall figure. It's pretty interesting here. You have the mortgage debt. It's at 13 trillion. This means that people that borrow money from the bank actually to buy a house, their overall debt is at 13 trillion. I have to repay this to the bank over the next course of 20 or 30 years. Here you have the student loan debt at 1.2 trillion American dollars, 1.3 trillion actually. This means that students are indebted to the banks because of because it costs so much to study. It's incredible that they actually give so much information here. It's for everybody, for the entire world to see actually. A US gross domestic product, or GDP, is at 17 trillion nearly, and you must look that the debt is at 17.6 trillion, so it's nearly 105% of GDP. This means the total output of an entire year, the United States of America and all its people produce, is the GDP, the services and products that it produces. It's at 16, the gross domestic GDP, it's at 16.8 trillion, and the debt is at 17.7 trillion. Just imagine how large that is. It's incredible. So I wanted to point out the difference. That is the US national debt. That is what the US government owes actually the central bank, the Federal Reserve. That is actually in private hands. And down here we have the US total debt. These are the people and corporations that owe the banks for borrowing money to build up their enterprise or buy a house or whatever. This is the US total debt. It's at 61.5 trillion US dollars, or 61.61 million. Just think about that. That's how much debt there is in America. Well, there is a website again, the U.S. National Debt Clock, and practically all countries in the world are indebted to a central bank and are actually indebted to private banks actually. And there is the total world debt. It's 233.3 trillion US dollars. Total world debt load at 313% of GDP. This means that it's that debt in developed countries amounted to 157 trillion or 376% of GDP. Emerging market debt has dealt at 63.3 trillion. This is the world debt actually, well, according to Google. I'm not sure if this is right though. If America already has 17 trillion, it could be possible. Yeah. But I believe the real debt of everybody on earth to the banks is way higher. It is a list of central banks, and as you can see, practically every country on earth has a central bank, a Rothschild central bank, controlled by the Rothschilds. That's interesting. In 2000, there were 7 countries without a Rothschild-owned bank, and it was Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, Cuba, North Korea, and Iran. And these are the 7, the so-called axis of evil by George W. Bush. Well, you have to understand how central banking actually works. The Rothschilds control practically all the central banks in the world, and they're all from that little clan of family that you know who. I made a video about 5 years ago about Alex on the Federal Reserve. I suggest you watch it. It gives you a detailed overview on how central banking actually works. But as you can see, the question that people never ask themselves is, who are these countries indebted to? Why are all these countries indebted to their central banks? And what happens when central banks dictates US policy, as an example? The ones that are indebted to the banks are the servants of the banks, because they owe them money. They create the money out of thin air, print it, borrow it out to the state, and indebt these people. It is all interwoven, and once you're indebted, you have to pay it off. You're a slave of the money. You have to work and work and work to pay off the debt. You are enslaved via this debt, money debt. And yeah, I just found it very interesting, that website. The Rothschild-controlled banks, they print the money, loan it out, create debt that cannot be repaid. Fractional reserve banking is a fact for many banks in the world. They don't have the money. They loan out the money 10 times what they have in reserve. In this respect, they create a bubble of debt that is unpayable because there's not enough money in the system to repay that debt. So you're an eternal slave, and at the same time, it's made surely that corporations or even firms or private entities, corporations can go bankrupt because there's not enough money in the system to repay the debt. So this system infests our economical society, our way of living, and it can be turned off on and on at will. An economic crisis can be turned off on and off, because it's all this whole system is intertwined with the central bank that holds the entire debt, and they depict the amount of money that goes into the system and goes back into the system, and then they demand via the interest rates They allow for cheaper or more expensive money, more investment or less, so it expands and contracts the economy. They have a lot of power. And one of the few countries that had a different system was the Third Reich. It was independent of Rothschild or international financial jewelry, and that's why it got destroyed. It was a different system that worked on the ability to produce goods actually, not on central banking and interest and debt. So you can make it pretty easy. Make a list of all the countries who have a central bank, practically most countries in this world, and the ones that don't have a central bank, and you know which is on the hit list. Even Russia has a central bank and is indebted to a private central bank. So this tells us that even Russia is under their control. If Putin would be truly powerful and free, then they would also, then the other countries would create a war to remove Putin. Even China has a central bank. So that is how vast their control is. Just follow the money trail and see who is indebted to whom, and which country don't have national debts. The Third Reich was destroyed for creating a system that was independent of the Rothschild-controlled central banking cartels. Germany back then did not want war, nor Hitler. Well, I just wanted to make a short video on the total world debt. If you owe me money, you're at my bidding. We are all so hopelessly enslaved, indebted actually, to the banks, and these banks are themselves indebted to the central banks, and the central banks control the money flow, and by controlling the money flow, they expand and contract the so-called economies, and dictate practically which firms will and will not make it. They dictate monetary policy. If we would have a sound system, everybody would have a job. There would be no joblessness. The Third Reich had an incredible economical system. That's why the main reason that it got destroyed, because it was independent of Russia-controlled financial banking. Anyhow, hope you enjoyed this video and cheers.